The camera opens on a sterile nursing home room. Beige walls, fluorescent lighting, and the smell of disinfectant hanging in the air. Maggie Chen sits on the edge of a narrow bed, her hands folded in her lap, staring at a door that just closed. Her silver hair is perfectly combed, her clothes neat and pressed, but her eyes tell a different story. They're the eyes of someone who has just watched her world walk away. She turns to face the camera, and when she speaks, her voice carries the weight of 43 years of motherhood and 5 years of widowhood. 43 years ago, I held my firstborn son in my arms and promised him the world. Yesterday, he signed papers to leave me here and told the nurse I have dementia. Her voice breaks slightly, but she steadies herself. I don't have dementia. I have a broken heart. The silence stretches for a moment as she looks down at her hands. These are hands that have changed countless diapers, packed thousands of lunches, wiped away tears, and held her children through their darkest moments. Now they sit empty in her lap. My name is Margaret Chen, but everyone calls me Maggie. 3 hours ago, my 3 children walked out of this room after what they called getting me settled. They hugged me goodbye like I was going on vacation, not like they were abandoning me in a place that smells like sadness and sounds like giving up. She gestures around the small room. This is room 247 at Sunset Manor. The brochure calls it assisted living. But let me tell you what it really is. It's where children put their parents when loving them becomes inconvenient. Maggie's voice grows stronger, more direct. David, my eldest, is a lawyer. He's 32 years old, drives a BMW, and lives in a house I helped buy by working double shifts as a substitute teacher. Sarah, my daughter, runs a marketing company. She's 29, travels the world, and still calls me when she needs my famous chocolate chip cookie recipe. Tommy, my baby, just turned 25. He lived with me for 2 years after college while he found himself eating my food and letting me do his laundry. She pauses, looking directly into the camera. I gave them everything I had. I mean, everything. When my husband James died of cancer 5 years ago, I could have grieved. I could have taken time to figure out who I was without him. Instead, I threw myself into being the perfect mother, the perfect grandmother in waiting, the perfect woman who never asks for anything because she's too busy giving. Her hands clench slightly. I sold my dream house to pay for David's law school. I worked overtime to help Sarah start her business. I opened my home to Tommy when he needed a place to land. I cooked their favorite meals, remembered their birthdays, listened to their problems, and never once asked them to do the same for me. Maggie's voice drops to almost a whisper. And you know what they did? They decided I was too much trouble, too needy, too dependent. They had a family meeting about me, like I was a problem to be solved instead of a person to be loved. She looks around the room again, taking in the plastic furniture, the generic artwork, the window that faces a parking lot. So here I am, in a place where people come to wait for death, surrounded by strangers who get paid to care about me. My children think this story is over. They think I'm just going to fade away quietly, gratefully, without causing any trouble. For the first time, something that might be a smile crosses her face. They're wrong. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the life I had before this room, before these beige walls became my world. Let me tell you about the woman I used to be, because understanding her is the only way you'll understand what they took from me. 5 years ago, I was Mrs. James Chen, living in a beautiful 2-story colonial on Maple Street with a wraparound porch and a garden that was the envy of the neighborhood. James and I had built that life together over 28 years of marriage. He was an accountant, steady and reliable, and I was a 3rd-grade teacher who loved watching little minds discover the magic of reading. Then cancer came for him like a thief in the night. Pancreatic cancer, the doctor said. 6 months, maybe 8 if we were lucky. We weren't lucky. James died on a Tuesday morning in February, holding my hand and telling me he was proud of the mother I'd been to our children. I remember standing in our kitchen the day after his funeral, looking at the casserole dishes covering every surface, brought by well-meaning neighbors who didn't know what else to do with their sympathy. David found me there, still in my black dress from the service, staring at a tuna noodle casserole like it held the secrets of the universe. "Mom," he said, putting his arms around me, "you don't have to go through this alone. We're here for you. We're family." And for the first time since James died, I felt like I could breathe. My children needed me, and I needed to be needed. It gave me purpose when everything else felt pointless. Sarah moved back home for 3 months to help me get back on my feet. She'd sit at the kitchen table with her laptop, building her marketing business while I cooked her favorite meals and did her laundry. "Mom, you're amazing," she'd say, looking up from her work. "I don't know how you do it all." Tommy was finishing his senior year of college, but he called me every day. "How are you holding up, Mom?" he'd ask. And I'd tell him about my day, about the garden I was planning, about how I was thinking of redecorating the living room. He'd listen like every word mattered, like I was the most interesting person in the world. When Tommy graduated, it was David who suggested he move back home. "Mom needs the company," he told his siblings, "and Tommy needs time to figure out his next steps. It's perfect." And it was perfect. The house felt alive again with Tommy's energy, his friends dropping by, his laughter echoing through rooms that had been too quiet for too long. Every Sunday, they all came home for dinner. I'd spend Saturday shopping and cooking, preparing all their favorite dishes. David would arrive with his wife Jennifer. Sarah would bring whatever guy she was dating that month. And Tommy would set the table like he had when he was 10 years old. We'd sit around the dining room table James had built with his own hands, and I'd listen to them talk about their lives, their dreams, their problems. "Mom, you're the glue that holds this family together," Sarah would say, hugging me after every gathering. "What would we do without you?" I lived for those words. I lived for being needed, for being the center of their universe, for being the one they turned to when life got complicated. When David needed money for law school, I refinanced the house. When Sarah's startup needed capital, I cashed in my retirement savings. When Tommy needed a place to land, I opened my doors without question. I thought I was being a good mother. I thought I was showing them love by giving them everything I had. I thought that as long as I was useful, I was loved. I thought wrong. The first crack in my perfect family picture happened on a Saturday in late spring. Tommy was graduating from college with his business degree, and I had been planning his graduation party for weeks. I wanted it to be perfect, the way every mother does when her baby reaches a milestone. I spent days cooking his favorite foods, decorating the backyard with string lights, and making sure every detail was exactly right. The party was everything I'd hoped for. Our backyard was filled with Tommy's friends, my neighbors, and family members who hadn't been together since James's funeral. I moved through the crowd like a conductor orchestrating a symphony, refilling drinks, bringing out fresh appetizers, making sure everyone felt welcomed and fed. This was what I did best. This was who I was. Around 8 o'clock, I was carrying a tray of my famous spinach and artichoke dip from the kitchen when I heard voices coming from the hallway. David and his wife Jennifer were standing near the bathroom, talking in those hushed tones that immediately make you strain to listen. Something about the way they were positioned, the way their heads were bent together, made me slow my steps. "She's getting a little too clingy," David was saying, his voice carrying that tone he'd used as a teenager when he was complaining about something. "She calls me 3 times a day now. Yesterday she called just to tell me about her conversation with the grocery store clerk. I mean, come on." Jennifer nodded, adjusting her designer purse on her shoulder. "My mom went through the same thing after Dad died. It's like they don't know how to exist without being the center of attention. Maybe you should start setting some boundaries before it gets worse." I stood there in the hallway, holding that tray of dip, feeling like I'd been slapped. Clingy? I called him 3 times because I wanted to share my day with him, the way families do. I told him about Mrs. Peterson at the grocery store because she'd asked about him, because I was proud of him, because I thought he might care about the people in my small world. "The thing is," David continued, running his hand through his hair the way he always did when he was stressed, "I don't want to hurt her feelings, but she's becoming dependent on us for everything. Social interaction, emotional support, even entertainment. We can't be responsible for her happiness. My hands started shaking, and I realized I was holding my breath. Entertainment? Was that what my phone calls were to him? Was wanting to talk to my son about his day really asking too much? You need to start weaning her off, Jennifer said, like she was discussing a child's bad habit. Don't answer every call. Let some of them go to voicemail. When she asks to see you, tell her you're busy. She'll get the message eventually. I heard footsteps approaching and quickly composed myself, forcing a bright smile onto my face as I rounded the corner into the kitchen. David and Jennifer were already there, examining the dessert table like they'd been there the whole time. "Oh, hey, Mom," David said, his voice suddenly cheerful and loud. "We were just talking about how great the party is. You outdid yourself again." "Thank you, sweetheart," I managed, setting the tray down with hands that were still trembling slightly. "I just wanted Tommy to feel special on his big day." "Well, mission accomplished," Jennifer said, giving me one of her perfect smiles. "Everything looks amazing." They walked away, rejoining the party like nothing had happened. But I stood there in my kitchen, surrounded by the food I'd spent days preparing, listening to the laughter of people celebrating my son's achievement, and felt completely alone. For the first time since James died, I wondered if I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, someone clingy, someone burdensome, someone who needed to learn boundaries. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it would grow in the darkness of the months to come. After that night, I became hyper-aware of everything. Every phone call I made, every text I sent, every invitation I extended, I questioned. Was I being too clingy? Was I asking too much? The doubt David and Jennifer had planted began to sprout into something darker, something that changed how I saw myself and my place in my children's lives. The changes started small. David, who used to answer my calls on the second ring, began letting them go to voicemail. When he did call back, it was always brief, distracted. "Hey, Mom, sorry I missed your call. I'm swamped at work. Can I call you back later?" But later rarely came. I started keeping track in a little notebook, though I'm ashamed to admit it now. Monday, called David at 2 p.m., no answer. Tuesday, texted about a recipe he'd asked for, no response. Wednesday, called to tell him about running into his old teacher at the post office, went to voicemail. By Friday, I was staring at that notebook, wondering when loving my son had become a source of anxiety. Sarah was different but equally painful. She'd answer my calls, but I could hear the multitasking in her voice, the clicking of her keyboard, the rustle of papers, the distant uh-huh responses that told me she wasn't really listening. One Tuesday afternoon, I called to tell her about a job opportunity I'd seen that might interest her marketing company. "Mom, I'm in the middle of something important," she said, her voice sharp with irritation. "Can this wait?" "I just thought you might want to know about this opportunity," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "It's a big retail chain looking for—" "Mom, I don't need you to find me work. I'm perfectly capable of running my own business." The line went quiet for a moment. I could hear her breathing, probably already regretting her tone, but the words hung between us like smoke. "I know you are, sweetheart," I said quietly. "I was just trying to help." "I know, Mom. I'm sorry. I'm just stressed, but really I have to go. I have a client meeting in 5 minutes." After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen for an hour, staring at the newspaper clipping I'd cut out for her. I'd been so excited to share it, so proud to have found something that might help her business grow. Now it felt like evidence of my own desperation. Tommy was the cruelest blow because he was the most gradual. My baby, who had lived in my house for 2 years, who had eaten my cooking and let me fuss over him, slowly began to slip away. First, he started working late more often. Then he began spending weekends with friends instead of at home. Our daily conversations became every few days, then weekly, then sporadic. When I asked him about it, he'd get defensive. "Mom, I'm 25 years old. I can't live at home forever. I need to build my own life." "I'm not asking you to live at home forever," I'd say, trying not to sound as desperate as I felt. "I just miss talking to you." "We're talking now," he'd reply, but his eyes were always on his phone, his attention somewhere else. The Sunday dinners that had been the highlight of my week became monthly events, then special occasions only. The house that had been filled with laughter and conversation fell silent. I'd cook elaborate meals for myself, setting the table for one, eating in a dining room that felt cavernous and empty. I started volunteering at the library, joining a book club, taking painting classes at the community center. I was trying to build a life that didn't revolve around my children, but every activity felt like a pale substitute for what I'd lost. I wasn't just losing my family, I was losing myself. The woman who had once been the center of her family's universe was becoming invisible, fading into the background of lives that no longer seemed to have room for her. My 58th birthday fell on a Thursday in October. I hadn't made any plans because, honestly, I didn't know if anyone would show up. The woman who used to plan elaborate celebrations for everyone else's milestones found herself sitting alone, wondering if her own children would remember the day she was born. David called that morning. "Hey Mom, happy birthday. Listen, how about we take you out to dinner tonight? Somewhere nice, my treat." Relief flooded through me like warm water. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Should I meet you somewhere?" "How about Romano's at 7? You know, that Italian place on 5th Street where we used to go for special occasions?" Romano's. Where we'd celebrated David's law school graduation, Sarah's first big client, Tommy's 21st birthday. It felt like a peace offering, like maybe we were finding our way back to each other. I spent the afternoon getting ready, choosing my best dress, the navy blue one with the silver buttons that James had always loved. I did my hair and put on the pearl earrings the children had given me for Mother's Day 3 years ago. Looking in the mirror, I felt hopeful for the first time in months. I arrived at Romano's 5 minutes early, wanting to be punctual, wanting everything to be perfect. The hostess seated me at a round table in the back corner, and I sat there checking my watch, smoothing my dress, and rehearsing conversation topics that might interest my children. 7 o'clock came and went, then 7:15. At 7:20, I saw them walking through the restaurant, David and Jennifer, Sarah with her latest boyfriend Marcus, and Tommy looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. But they weren't looking for me. They were already deep in conversation, heading toward a different table entirely. I watched, confused, as they sat down at a table near the window. Had there been a mistake? I stood up, ready to wave them over, when I heard David's voice carry across the restaurant. "The thing is, she's becoming a real burden," he was saying, cutting into his bread with more force than necessary. "I mean, I love Mom, but she calls constantly. She has no life of her own, and now she's guilt-tripping us about not spending enough time with her." My legs went weak. I sat back down, hidden behind a decorative pillar, invisible to my own children who were discussing me like I was a problem to be solved. Jennifer nodded sympathetically. "My mother went through the same thing after my father passed. It's like they don't know how to exist without being the center of attention. You have to be firm about boundaries, or it just gets worse." "Exactly," Sarah chimed in, taking a sip of her wine. "Last week she called me 3 times about some job listing she found in the newspaper. Like I'm some college graduate who needs help finding work. It's embarrassing." Tommy, my baby who I'd supported through 2 years of post-graduation confusion, looked uncomfortable but didn't defend me. "Maybe we should just be direct with her. Tell her she needs to get her own life." "The problem is," David continued, "she's getting older, and she's going to start expecting us to take care of her more and more. We need to establish boundaries now before it becomes a bigger issue." I sat there, 20 feet away from my children, listening to them dissect my life like I was already dead. The birthday dinner wasn't for me, it was about me. They'd planned to have dinner together to discuss what to do about their burdensome mother, and then probably pick up a cake on the way to my house to make a token appearance. At exactly 7:30, they stood up from their table. David checked his watch and said something I couldn't quite hear, but I caught the words, "Better go, and get this over with." I waited until they left the restaurant, then sat there for another 10 minutes, staring at the empty chair across from me. When they arrived at my house 20 minutes later, with a grocery store cake and forced smiles, singing happy birthday, like nothing had happened, I played along. But something inside me had fundamentally shifted. I wasn't their mother anymore. I was their burden. 3 weeks after my birthday dinner from hell, Life handed me what would become the final straw, though I didn't recognize it at the time. It was a Tuesday morning in early November, and I was reaching for a coffee mug from the top shelf of my kitchen cabinet when I felt myself lose balance. The step stool I was standing on wobbled, and I came down hard on my left hip, taking half the contents of the shelf with me. I lay there on my kitchen floor, surrounded by broken ceramic and scattered coffee grounds, more embarrassed than hurt. My hip ached, but nothing felt broken. Still, I couldn't seem to get back up on my own. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, I managed to reach my phone and call David. "Mom, what's wrong? You sound upset." "I had a little fall in the kitchen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm okay, but I'm having trouble getting up. Could you come over and help me?" The silence on the other end lasted long enough for me to wonder if the call had dropped. "David, are you there?" "Yeah, Mom, I'm here." "A fall? Are you hurt? Do you need an ambulance?" "No, no ambulance. I just need help getting up. My hip is a little sore, but I don't think anything's broken." "Okay, I'll be right there. Don't try to move until I get there." David arrived 30 minutes later, but he wasn't alone. Jennifer was with him, carrying a manila folder that immediately made my stomach drop. They helped me to the couch, David checking my hip and arms for injuries, while Jennifer stood in my living room looking around like she was appraising real estate. "Mom, you seem okay physically," David said, sitting down across from me with the careful posture of someone about to deliver bad news. "But we need to talk. This fall, it's exactly what Jennifer and I have been worried about." "It was just a minor stumble," I protested. "I was reaching too high. It could happen to anyone." Jennifer opened her folder and pulled out several glossy brochures. "Mrs. Chen, David and I have been researching some options for you. Beautiful places where you'd have help available 24 hours a day, where you wouldn't have to worry about falling and not being able to get help." I stared at the brochures she was arranging on my coffee table like a real estate presentation. Sunset Manor, Golden Years Assisted Living, Harmony Hills Senior Community. Each one featured smiling elderly people in pristine common areas, looking perfectly content to have given up their independence. "You want to put me in a nursing home because I fell off a step stool?" David leaned forward, his lawyer voice activating. "Mom, it's not just the fall. You've been calling us constantly. You seem lonely and isolated here, and now you're having accidents. We think you'd be happier somewhere with people your own age, with activities and social opportunities." "Happier?" The word came out sharper than I intended. "Or would you be happier not having to worry about your clingy, burdensome mother bothering you anymore?" The room went silent. David and Jennifer exchanged a look that confirmed everything I'd suspected since my birthday dinner. "Mom, that's not fair," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We're doing this because we love you and want you to be safe." I looked at the brochures, then at my son and his wife sitting in the living room where I'd raised 3 children, where James and I had built a life, where every piece of furniture held a memory. They'd already made the decision. This conversation was just a formality. "How long do I have to decide?" I asked quietly. "We've already put a deposit down at Sunset Manor," Jennifer said gently. "They have an opening next week. We thought, given your fall today, sooner would be better than later." I nodded, something inside me simply shutting down. Okay. That was it. No fight, no tears, no desperate plea for them to reconsider. Just okay. Because what was the point of fighting for a place in the lives of people who saw you as a problem to be solved? My first night at Sunset Manor will haunt me until the day I die. It wasn't the institutional smell of disinfectant mixed with something I couldn't quite identify, or the way the fluorescent lights hummed overhead like dying insects. It wasn't even the narrow bed with its plastic mattress cover that crinkled every time I moved. It was the sound of my own life being reduced to what could fit in cardboard boxes. David and Jennifer had packed most of my belongings while I sat in a chair, watching 43 years of homemaking disappear into containers marked kitchen, bedroom, and miscellaneous. They'd been efficient, I'll give them that. They'd taken photos of me with James, my teaching awards, a few pieces of jewelry, and my favorite books. Everything else, James's tools, my china set, the Christmas decorations we'd collected over decades, would be dealt with later. We'll put the house on the market next month, David had said, not meeting my eyes. The proceeds will help pay for your care here. My care. Like I was a houseplant that needed occasional watering. Sarah had shown up just as they were loading the last box, carrying a small bouquet of grocery store flowers, and wearing the guilty expression of someone fulfilling an obligation. I'm sorry I couldn't help pack, Mom. Big presentation today. Tommy hadn't come at all. He wanted to, Sarah explained. But it would just be too hard on him. Too hard on him. Watching his mother lose her home would be too hard on my 25-year-old son. Now I sat on the edge of this strange bed, in this room that smelled like other people's sadness, surrounded by boxes I didn't have the energy to unpack. Through the thin walls, I could hear Mrs. Patterson next door crying for her daughter, the same daughter who'd dropped her off 3 months ago and visited twice since then. Down the hall, someone was watching a game show at full volume, the host's artificially cheerful voice echoing through the corridor like a mockery. I opened the box marked Personal Items and found the Mother's Day card Tommy had given me just 2 years ago. The cover showed a cartoon mother bear hugging her cub, and inside, in his careful handwriting, he'd written, "To the best mom in the world. You sacrificed everything for us, and I'll never forget that. I love you more than words can say. Thank you for always believing in me." I held that card against my chest and felt something inside me finally break completely. Not crack, not bend, but shatter into pieces, so small I didn't think they could ever be put back together. This was what my love had earned me. This sterile room with its beige walls and regulation furniture. This view of a parking lot where my children had driven away without looking back. This silence that stretched ahead of me like a prison sentence. I thought about James, about how he'd died holding my hand, telling me he was proud of the mother I'd been. Would he be proud now? Would he understand how I'd gotten here? How the woman who'd raised his children with such devotion had ended up alone and forgotten? I thought about my third-grade students, how their eyes would light up when I read them stories about brave princesses and clever children who overcame impossible odds. What would I tell them about this story? How would I explain that sometimes love isn't enough, that giving everything you have doesn't guarantee you'll be cherished in return? The card slipped from my fingers as exhaustion overwhelmed me. I lay down on that narrow bed, still fully dressed, still wearing the pearl earrings my children had given me for Mother's Day, and cried for the first time since James died. I cried for the woman I used to be, for the family I thought I had, and for the future I'd never imagined. I cried until there was nothing left inside me but emptiness and the terrible understanding that I had confused being needed with being loved, and now I was neither. 3 days passed in a haze of institutional routine. Wake up at 6:30 to the sound of medication carts rattling down the hallway. Breakfast in the communal dining room where residents sat at assigned tables, most eating in silence while CNN played on a television nobody was watching. Physical therapy sessions that felt more like going through the motions than actual healing. Dinner at 5:30, followed by evening programming that consisted of bingo or a movie from 1985. I moved through it all like a ghost, speaking only when spoken to, eating without tasting, existing without living. The staff was kind enough. They called me honey and dear and made sure I took my vitamins, but I could see in their eyes that they'd categorized me already. Another abandoned mother. Another woman whose children had moved on with their lives. On my 4th morning, I finally found the motivation to unpack the remaining boxes. Not because I was ready to make this place home, but because I couldn't stand looking at the cardboard reminders of everything I'd lost. I started with the box marked Personal Items, moving slowly, as if each object might cut me if I handled it too quickly. There were my teaching certificates, framed photos from classroom parties, a coffee mug that read, "World's Greatest Mom," in faded letters. At the bottom of the box, underneath a silk scarf I'd forgotten I owned, my fingers touched something that made me pause. An envelope, cream-colored and slightly yellowed, with my name written in James's careful handwriting. I sat down heavily on the bed, my heart racing. James had been meticulous about many things, but letter writing wasn't one of them. He was a man of action, not words. Someone who showed love through fixing leaky faucets and remembering to buy my favorite coffee creamer. This envelope felt different, important, like something he'd saved for a moment when I would need it most. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice, dated just 3 weeks before he died. The handwriting was shakier than usual. The cancer had already begun taking his strength, but every word was deliberate, chosen with care. "My dearest Maggie," it began, and I could hear his voice so clearly it made my chest ache. "I'm writing this because I need you to remember something after I'm gone. That you are not just a mother, though you're the best one I've ever known. You are not just a wife, though you've made me happier than I ever deserved to be. You are Margaret Chen, the woman who taught third graders to believe in themselves, who could make a stranger smile with a single conversation, who sees the best in everyone, even when they don't deserve it. I know you, Maggie. I know that when I'm gone, you're going to try to love our children so hard that you'll forget to love yourself. You're going to give them everything, your time, your money, your dreams, your identity, because that's who you are. But I need you to promise me something. I need you to remember that you deserve to be cherished, not just needed. You deserve to be celebrated, not just useful. You gave up your teaching career for us, but you never stopped being extraordinary. You have wisdom that comes from truly listening to people, strength that comes from weathering real storms, and a heart that's big enough to love the whole world. Don't let anyone, not even our children, convince you that you're less than magnificent. If you're reading this, something has gone wrong. Someone has made you feel small, forgotten, unwanted. But you are none of those things. You are the woman I fell in love with, the mother who raised 3 remarkable human beings, the teacher who changed hundreds of lives. You are enough, Maggie. You have always been enough. Promise me you won't disappear. Promise me you'll fight for the woman I know you are. The world needs Margaret Chen, and so do you. All my love, always and forever, James. I read the letter 3 times before the words finally penetrated the fog of despair that had surrounded me for months. James had known. Somehow he'd seen this future, this moment when I would need to remember who I was before I became someone's everything. For the first time since entering this place, I looked in the mirror and saw not a discarded mother, but a woman with a choice to make. James's letter sat on my nightstand for 2 days while I wrestled with what it meant and what I was supposed to do with it. Part of me wanted to tuck it away, to let it become another beautiful memory that didn't require any action on my part. But his words kept echoing in my mind. Promise me you won't disappear. Had I disappeared? Looking around my sterile room, seeing how I'd been moving through each day like a shadow, I realized that yes, I had been disappearing, piece by piece, day by day. On Saturday morning, I was making my way to the dining room for breakfast when I heard children's laughter coming from the community room. I paused outside the door and peered in to see about 8 children, ages 5 to 10, sitting in a circle while a staff member struggled to read them a story. She was doing her best, but she kept stumbling over words, and the children were growing restless. "Can I help?" I found myself asking, the words out of my mouth before I'd consciously decided to speak. The staff member, a young woman named Ashley, looked up with relief. "Are you sure? They're pretty energetic today." I looked at the children, a little girl with pigtails who was fidgeting with her shoelaces, a boy with thick glasses who was trying to peek at the book's ending, another girl who kept raising her hand even though no one had asked a question. They reminded me of every third-grade class I'd ever taught, full of curiosity and energy and the desperate need to be seen and heard. "I'm sure," I said, settling into the chair Ashley vacated. The book was Charlotte's Web, and we were only 3 chapters in. I looked at their expectant faces and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Purpose. "Now who can tell me what happened to Wilbur in the last chapter?" I asked, and suddenly 8 hands shot into the air. For the next hour, I was completely myself again. Not the abandoned mother, not the nursing home resident, not the burden my children couldn't handle. I was Mrs. Chen, the teacher who could make stories come alive, who could turn reading time into an adventure, who could see the spark in every child's eyes and fan it into a flame. The children hung on every word as I read about Charlotte's Web, doing voices for each character, pausing to ask questions that made them think deeper about the story. When little Emma, a 6-year-old with curly red hair, said, "Mrs. Maggie, Charlotte is like a mother who takes care of Wilbur even when no one else wants him," I felt something crack open in my chest. "That's exactly right, Emma," I said, my voice thick with emotion I tried to hide. "Charlotte sees how special Wilbur is, even when he can't see it himself." After the children left, Ashley approached me with obvious excitement. "That was incredible. They've never been that engaged. Are you a teacher?" "I was," I said, and for the first time in years, I felt proud instead of wistful about my past. "I taught 3rd grade for 22 years. Would you consider volunteering? We have reading time every Tuesday and Saturday, but we struggle to find people who really connect with the kids." I thought about James's letter, about his challenge to remember who I was before I became someone's everything. I thought about disappearing versus fighting for the woman I knew I could still be. "Yes," I said, and the word felt like the first real decision I'd made in months. I'd love that. Walking back to my room, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. For the first time since arriving at Sunset Manor, the woman looking back at me had light in her eyes. She looked like someone who had something valuable to offer the world. She looked like Margaret Chen, the teacher. Margaret Chen, the woman who could make children believe in themselves. Margaret Chen, who was very much worth saving. The reading program became my anchor, but it also opened my eyes to things I'd been too depressed to notice before. During my second week of volunteering, I overheard a conversation between 2 staff members that made me pay closer attention to how Sunset Manor actually operated. "Mrs. Patterson's daughter hasn't visited in 6 weeks, Ashley was saying to another aide. "But she calls every month asking about her mother's savings account and when the house will sell." That night, I started a small notebook. Not to track my children's calls this time, but to document what I was observing around me. Residents whose families had essentially abandoned them while managing their finances from a distance. Elderly people who'd signed over power of attorney without understanding what they were giving up. Stories that sounded disturbingly familiar. I began spending time in the common areas, really listening to the other residents instead of hiding in my room. Mrs. Patterson told me how her daughter had convinced her to sell her house and move here temporarily 6 months ago. Mr. Rodriguez shared how his son had taken over his bank accounts just to help with the bills, and now wouldn't return his calls about accessing his own money. Each story made me more curious about my own situation. What exactly had David and Jennifer done with my finances when they'd arranged my admission? I'd been so emotionally shattered at the time that I'd signed whatever papers they'd put in front of me without reading them carefully. I started small. I called the bank where I'd had my accounts for 30 years, claiming I needed to verify some information for my taxes. What I learned made my blood run cold. David had been added to my accounts as a joint owner, not just someone who could help in emergencies. He had complete access to my money, and according to the banker, there had been several large withdrawals in the past month. Next, I contacted my old insurance agent, someone who'd handled my policies since James was alive. "Margaret, how are you settling in at your new place? David told me you were having some memory issues." "Memory issues? Actually, my memory is fine," I said carefully. "I'm calling to review my life insurance policy. Could you send me a copy?" When the documents arrived 3 days later, I discovered that David had tried to change the beneficiaries on my life insurance policy, claiming I'd requested it due to cognitive decline. Fortunately, the insurance company had required a doctor's evaluation, which I'd never completed because I'd never been asked to. I made an appointment with Dr. Patricia Walsh, my family physician, using the community shuttle that Sunset Manor provided for medical visits. Dr. Walsh had known me for 15 years, and she was shocked by what I told her. "Margaret, you're one of the sharpest patients I have. she said, after conducting a thorough mental status examination. Your cognitive function is completely normal. There's absolutely no medical reason you couldn't live independently. Could you document that? I asked. In writing? Of course, but Margaret, what's really going on here? I told her everything. About the fall, about David's rushed decision to place me here, about the financial irregularities I'd discovered. Dr. Walsh's expression grew increasingly concerned as I spoke. You need to speak with an attorney, she said finally. What you're describing sounds like financial elder abuse and possibly fraud. That afternoon, I researched elder law attorneys on the computer in Sunset Manor's library. I found one, Elizabeth Morrison, whose website specifically mentioned cases involving family financial exploitation. I called her office and scheduled a consultation for the following week. I didn't tell anyone about my discoveries or my plans, not the staff, not the other residents, and certainly not my children. For the first time in my adult life, I was keeping secrets, planning my own future without asking permission or seeking approval. I was learning to protect myself, and it felt both terrifying and exhilarating. And Margaret Chen was done being a victim. My meeting with Elizabeth Morrison, the elder law attorney, was scheduled for a Thursday morning in December. I told the Sunset Manor staff I had a routine doctor's appointment, took the community shuttle downtown, and walked into Morrison's office, feeling more nervous than I had since my first day of teaching. Elizabeth was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen too many families destroy each other over money. She listened to my story without interruption, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions that made me realize she'd handled cases like mine before. Mrs. Chen, she said when I finished, what you're describing constitutes financial elder abuse under state law. Your son adding himself to your accounts without clear necessity, making large withdrawals, and attempting to change your insurance beneficiaries while claiming you have cognitive impairment. These are serious legal violations. She explained my options with the kind of clarity I appreciated. I could file for immediate restoration of my financial independence, challenge David's power over my accounts, and potentially pursue criminal charges for fraud. More importantly, she could help me regain control of my life. The medical evaluation from Dr. Walsh is crucial, Elizabeth continued. It proves you're mentally competent to make your own decisions. With her documentation, we can argue that your placement here was unnecessary and potentially coercive. I left her office with a plan, and for the first time in months, genuine hope. Elizabeth would begin the legal process while I continued gathering evidence. She'd given me specific things to watch for, questions to ask, and ways to document everything. The shift started subtly. David had been visiting every other week since placing me at Sunset Manor, usually quick 30-minute check-ins that felt more like obligation than affection. But 2 weeks after my meeting with Elizabeth, his visits changed. "Mom, you look different," he said during his next visit, studying my face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "More alert. The staff here must be taking good care of you." I smiled pleasantly. "The reading program has been wonderful. I'm working with 8 children now, and they're making remarkable progress." "Reading program?" David's eyebrows rose. "I didn't know you were doing that." "There's a lot you don't know about my life here," I said mildly, and watched something flicker across his face. Uncertainty, maybe, or the first hint of concern. The phone calls started a few days later, first from Ashley, the activities coordinator, who mentioned to David during a routine update call that I was remarkably sharp and had become a real leader among the residents. Then from Dr. Martinez, the facility's medical director, who noted during a family conference call that my cognitive function was excellent and my engagement with activities was impressive. I could see David processing this information, trying to reconcile it with the narrative he'd created about my decline. During his next visit, he brought Jennifer, and they both seemed to be studying me more carefully. "Mom, are you taking any new medications?" Jennifer asked. "You seem so much more present." "I'm taking the same vitamins I've always taken," I replied. "I think I was just depressed before, grieving the loss of my independence, but I'm adjusting now." The word independence hung in the air between us. I watched David's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. What they didn't know was that Elizabeth Morrison had already begun filing papers challenging David's financial authority over me. What they didn't know was that I had documented evidence of their conversations about me being a burden. What they didn't know was that their abandoned, helpless mother had found her voice again. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening. David, his voice strained in a way I hadn't heard since he was a teenager caught in a lie. "Mom, we need to talk. Can Jennifer and I come see you this weekend?" "Of course, sweetheart," I said sweetly. "I'll be here." But I wouldn't be the same woman they'd left behind. Saturday arrived gray and cold, with the kind of December wind that cuts through even the heaviest coat. I spent the morning preparing for David and Jennifer's visit the way I used to prepare for parent-teacher conferences, organized, calm, and armed with documentation that would be impossible to dispute. Elizabeth Morrison had provided me with a folder containing bank statements, medical evaluations, and legal documents that painted a very clear picture of what had happened to me. But more than that, she'd given me something I'd lost months ago, the confidence that comes from knowing you're absolutely right. They arrived at 2 o'clock, both looking like they were attending a business meeting rather than visiting a family member. David carried his lawyer briefcase, and Jennifer clutched her purse like it contained secrets. They sat across from me in the small seating area of my room, and I could feel their nervous energy filling the space. "Mom, you look wonderful," David began, his voice carrying that artificial brightness people use when they're trying to manage a difficult conversation. "The staff here says you're doing remarkably well." "I am doing well," I replied evenly. "Better than I have in months, actually." Jennifer and David exchanged a glance, one of those married couple communications that thinks it's subtle but isn't. "That's great to hear," Jennifer said. "We've been worried about you, especially after the fall and everything that happened before you came here." "Yes, let's talk about that," I said, reaching for the folder on my side table. "I've been doing some thinking about how I ended up here, and I have some questions." I watched David's face change as I opened the folder. The confident attorney expression flickered, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like panic. "David, can you explain why you added yourself to my bank accounts without discussing it with me first?" The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. David's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "Mom, you were confused after the fall. We needed to make sure your bills were paid and—" "I wasn't confused," I interrupted, my voice steady and clear. "Dr. Walsh has provided a complete cognitive evaluation that shows I'm mentally competent and always have been. Would you like to see it?" I pulled out the medical report and placed it on the coffee table between us. Jennifer's face had gone pale. "Furthermore," I continued, "can you explain these withdrawals?" I showed them the bank statements, pointing to several large transactions that had occurred after my admission to Sunset Manor. $12,000 in November, $8,000 in October. What were these for? David's lawyer training finally kicked in. "Mom, those were for your care here for the deposit and—" "The deposit was $3,000, I said calmly. "I called and verified. So what was the other $17,000 for?" The room was completely silent except for the heating system cycling on. I could see David calculating, trying to figure out how much I knew and how much trouble he was in. "Mom, I think you're confused about—" "David." My voice cut through his words with the authority I'd once used to quiet a rowdy classroom. "I'm not confused, I'm not declining, I'm not incompetent. I'm a 68-year-old woman who trusted her son and discovered that trust was misplaced." I pulled out the final document, the legal papers Elizabeth had prepared. "These papers restore my financial independence and remove you from my accounts. They also establish that my placement here was unnecessary and potentially coercive, given my documented mental competency." Jennifer found her voice first. "Mrs. Chen, we were just trying to help." "No," I said firmly. "You were trying to solve what you saw as the problem of me. You discussed me like I was a burden. You made decisions about my life without including me. You took my money without permission. That's not help, Jennifer. That's abandonment and theft." David's face had gone from pale to red. Mom, you can't just make decisions like this without consulting us. I looked at my eldest son, this man I'd sacrificed so much for, and felt a calm I hadn't experienced in years. Actually, David, I can. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm informing you of my decision. And my lawyer is on speakerphone right now, listening to this entire conversation. Elizabeth's voice came through my phone, clear and professional. Good afternoon, David. We need to talk. The meeting with Elizabeth, David, and Jennifer lasted 2 hours and ended with David signing papers to restore my financial independence. But that was just the beginning of what I had planned. What my children didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything for weeks, not just their financial misconduct, but the systematic emotional abuse that had led to my placement at Sunset Manor. 3 days after the confrontation, I asked Ashley to set up a video call with the entire family. Sarah and Tommy appeared on screen from their respective homes, both looking confused about why they'd been summoned for an emergency family meeting. I want to share something with all of you, I began, sitting in front of my laptop in Sunset Manor's library. Behind me, visible on the video call, were my teaching certificates, photos of me with my students, and testimonials from parents. All things I'd requested be brought from storage. For the past 6 months, I've been keeping a journal of our interactions. I have recordings of conversations, screenshots of unanswered texts, and detailed accounts of how each of you has treated me since your father died. Sarah's face went pale on the screen. Mom, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the night of my birthday dinner, Sarah, when you all discussed what a burden I'd become before I even arrived at the restaurant. I'm talking about the family meeting you held about me, without me, where you decided I needed to be institutionalized. I'm talking about the systematic way you pushed me out of your lives. I pulled out a thick folder. I have everything documented. Tommy, I have records of how you went from calling me daily to weekly to not at all. Sarah, I have copies of the times you hung up on me for bothering you at work. David, well, David's financial misconduct is already being handled by the authorities. The silence on the video call was deafening. But here's what you don't know, I continued, my voice growing stronger. I'm not just moving out of Sunset Manor. I'm starting a foundation for elderly advocacy using my savings, the money you thought you were going to inherit. It's called the James Chen Foundation for Elder Dignity, and its first project is documenting family abandonment in senior care facilities. Tommy found his voice first. Mom, we didn't abandon you. Tommy, you couldn't even show up to help me move out of the house your father and I built. You said it would be too hard for you. Do you know what was hard? Watching my children discuss me like I was a problem to be solved instead of a person to be loved. Sarah started crying. Mom, we're sorry. We didn't realize. You didn't realize because you didn't want to see? I said firmly. You saw an inconvenient old woman instead of the mother who sacrificed her career, her savings, and her dreams to give you everything you wanted. I leaned forward, looking directly into the camera. The foundation is launching with a documentary about elder abuse in families. I've been interviewed by local news stations, and my story is going to be featured in a national magazine article about how adult children abandon their parents. David's lawyer instincts kicked in, even through his shock. Mom, you can't just. I can, and I am. But here's the interesting part, I said, allowing myself a small smile. The foundation isn't about revenge. It's about education. It's about teaching families how to honor their elderly relatives instead of discarding them. It's about making sure other women don't end up alone in a nursing home because their children couldn't be bothered to see them as human beings. I pulled out a newspaper clipping. This is from yesterday's paper. The headline reads, Local Teacher Turns Personal Tragedy into Advocacy Mission. The article mentions each of you by name and describes how a successful lawyer, a marketing executive, and a college graduate abandoned their widowed mother. The silence stretched until Jennifer, who had been quiet throughout the call, whispered, We didn't know it would be in the paper. Neither did I, until yesterday, I said calmly. Apparently, my story resonated with a lot of people. I've received 47 calls from other elderly people with similar experiences. The foundation already has more work than we can handle. I closed the folder and looked directly at the camera one final time. I'm not angry with any of you anymore. I'm disappointed, but I'm not angry. Because I've discovered something wonderful. I don't need your approval to have a meaningful life. I never did. 6 months later, I was living in a bright 2-bedroom apartment at Willowbrook Independent Living Community, a place where I had my own kitchen, my own schedule, and neighbors who chose to be there. I'd furnished it with pieces I'd bought myself. No hand-me-downs from my children, no furniture chosen by committee. Every item reflected my taste, my choices, my independence. It was a Saturday morning in June, and I was preparing for my weekly radio show, Elder Voices, where I interviewed seniors about their experiences and provided resources for families. The James Chen Foundation had grown beyond my wildest expectations, with chapters in 12 states and a waiting list of volunteers who wanted to help. The doorbell rang at exactly 10 o'clock. I looked through the peephole and saw Sarah standing there, holding a bouquet of sunflowers, my favorite, though I was surprised she remembered. She looked thinner than I remembered, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. I opened the door but didn't immediately invite her in. "Hello, Sarah." "Hi, Mom." Her voice was small, younger somehow. "I know I should have called first, but I was afraid you wouldn't see me." I studied my daughter for a long moment. The confident marketing executive was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely broken. "Come in," I said finally. She sat on the edge of my new sofa, like she was afraid to get comfortable. "Your apartment is beautiful," she said, looking around at the bright colors, the family photos that didn't include my children, the certificates and awards from the foundation prominently displayed. "Thank you. I like it here." I poured myself a cup of coffee, but didn't offer her one. I wasn't being cruel, but I wasn't going to pretend this was a normal mother-daughter visit either. "Mom, I've been seeing a therapist," Sarah said abruptly. "Since the article came out. Since I had to explain to my friends and colleagues why my mother was in the newspaper talking about how her children abandoned her." I waited. I'd learned the power of silence these past months. "Dr. Martinez, my therapist. She made me write down everything that happened from your perspective. Every phone call I ignored, every time I made you feel like you were bothering me, every moment I chose my convenience over your feelings." Tears were streaming down her face now. "Mom, I'm so sorry. We were selfish and cruel, and we convinced ourselves we were helping when we were just hurting you." "I appreciate your apology, Sarah," I said carefully, "but sorry isn't enough. I need to see change, not just hear about it." "I know." She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. "I wrote you a letter. Everything I want to say, everything I should have said months ago. But more than that, I want to ask you something." She looked up at me with eyes that reminded me of the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "Would you let me volunteer for the foundation? Not because I'm your daughter, but because I want to learn how to be better. I want to understand what we did wrong so I can help other families avoid making the same mistakes." I took the envelope but didn't open it. "Sarah, volunteering for the foundation means hearing stories like mine over and over again. It means confronting the reality of what happens when children see their parents as burdens instead of people. Are you prepared for that?" "I think so. My therapist thinks it would be good for me, and honestly, I think I need to understand the damage we caused." "And your brothers?" Sarah's face fell. "David is still angry about the legal proceedings and the publicity. He says you've embarrassed the family. Tommy is ashamed. He wants to reach out, but he doesn't know how." "I'm willing to consider your request," I said finally. "But not as your mother. If you volunteer for the foundation, you'll be screened like any other applicant. You'll go through training. You'll start with filing and data entry, not leadership roles." "And Sarah?" "Yes." "I won't be your supervisor. You'll report to Elizabeth Morrison, and if you can't handle the emotional weight of this work, you'll be asked to leave. Are you prepared for that?" Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. "I'm prepared to earn my way back into your life, Mom. however long it takes. For the first time since she'd arrived, I smiled slightly. Then we'll see. 1 year later, I'm sitting in the community garden at Willowbrook, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. In my hands is a cup of coffee made exactly how I like it, strong with just a touch of cream, and on the table beside me is a letter from the governor's office. The James Chen Foundation has been selected to receive the State Award for Elder Advocacy, and I've been invited to speak at the ceremony next month. The garden around me is thriving. I planted it myself last spring, choosing flowers that bloom at different times so there's always something beautiful to see. Sunflowers for strength, roses for resilience, and marigolds because they remind me of the classroom bulletin boards I used to create for my students. Every plant here exists because I chose it, nurtured it, and gave it the conditions it needed to flourish. It's Saturday morning, which means in an hour, 8 children will arrive for our weekly reading circle. We've moved beyond Charlotte's Web now. We're reading A Wrinkle in Time, a story about a girl who discovers she's braver and more powerful than anyone believed. The children hang on every word, just like my third graders used to do, their eyes wide with possibility. Sarah has been volunteering at the foundation for 10 months now. True to my word, she started with filing and worked her way up to conducting intake calls with families in crisis. Last week, she helped a woman whose son was trying to force her into assisted living, and I watched my daughter advocate fiercely for someone else's mother with a passion I'd never seen in her before. She's earned her place here, not because she's my daughter, but because she's become someone who truly understands the value of treating elderly people with dignity. Tommy called last month, a real call, not a guilty text message. He's been attending Al-Anon meetings, working through his own issues with boundaries and family relationships. He asked if he could visit, not to apologize. He's already done that in a letter that made me cry for the first time in months, but to meet the woman his mother has become. I said yes, because I'm curious about that myself. David and I haven't spoken since the foundation made national news 6 months ago. According to Sarah, he's struggling with the damage to his reputation and the way his law firm has quietly distanced itself from him since the financial abuse case became public. I don't wish him harm, but I don't feel responsible for fixing his problems either. That's a boundary I never thought I'd be able to maintain. The radio show has a waiting list of guests now. Every week, I interview seniors who've found ways to thrive after being written off by society, families, or circumstances. Yesterday, I spoke with an 82-year-old woman who started a nonprofit, a 70-year-old man who went back to school for his master's degree, and a 75-year-old couple who sold everything to travel the country in an RV. Their stories remind me that life doesn't end when your children grow up, when your spouse dies, or when society decides you're no longer useful. My phone buzzes with a text message. It's from Emma, the little girl with curly red hair from my first reading group at Sunset Manor. She's 10 now, and her message says, "Miss Maggie, I read Charlotte's Web to my little brother and told him about you. You're still my favorite teacher ever." I look at my reflection in the window of the community center and see a woman I'm proud to know. She's 59 years old, financially independent, professionally successful, and emotionally free. Her hair has more silver now, but her eyes are brighter than they've been in years. She looks like someone who knows her worth doesn't depend on how much she gives to others, but on who she chooses to be. She looks like Margaret Chen, advocate, teacher, and survivor. She looks like a woman who refused to disappear, who fought for herself when no one else would, and who discovered that the greatest gift you can give your children isn't everything you have. It's showing them how to live with dignity, purpose, and uncompromising self-respect. She looks like someone who finally learned the difference between being loved and being needed, and chose to love herself first.